with Ryan Gardner, Senior Counsel at First Liberty Institute. IRS has closed an investigation of a church because, well, they shouldn't have started it in the first place. Hi, Ryan.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing okay. I'm saying a little prayer right now as we speak. So which church are we talking about here?
This is New Way Church located in Palm Coast, Florida.
Okay. And what was going on there?
So basically what happened was back in 2022, a local school board candidate visited the church during the election season and went up on stage during one of their services and basically gave a testimonial talking about the importance of her faith, talking about why that led her to run for this particular school board position, as many other members, in fact, done in other situations, just sort of giving their own testimony. And after she had concluded that, the pastor prayed for her, as churches often do for anybody, for any number of reasons. And then that was the end of it, until they got a letter from the IRS threatening their tax-exempt status under a law known as the Johnson Amendment, claiming that the church had engaged in improper political conduct.
What?
Yes.
So she's a member of this church, and they wanted to pray for her.
So she wasn't a member. She was a visitor. She had reached out to the church about stopping by and giving her testimony. But it's the same thing as a number of churches do, just having guest speakers stop by. It was a very normal thing for them to do, to have her stop by in the middle of services, or someone else to stop by and talk to the congregation about their faith.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think all churches do that.
Absolutely. It's a very important thing, and it's at the core of First Amendment activity, by the way, and that's a very important point to think. I mean, this is not only freedom of speech, but freedom of religion, and we certainly don't want the government editing and dictating what can and cannot be said in the sermon from the pulpit.
How many times have the chickens come home to roost? You know, when Democrats have done their little shindigs in churches, have they been threatened with this?
Right, and I'm not aware of any, but we know that it's a very common practice, and not just at probably the local levels, but even at the highest levels of politics. I know in the last election cycle, both Kamala Harris and Joe Biden both visited churches during their campaigns, and frankly, they should have the right to do it just as much as anyone on the Republican side. It's something that all churches should be allowed to do. All churches should be allowed to operate according to the dictates of their own consciences and their own religious beliefs, and they should be able to do so free of any fear of the government coming down on them and taking something away from them just for following their own religious beliefs.
Yeah, and I don't really care if this person was a Republican or a Democrat. I really don't care. Either way, there's a precedent here that this is fine. So the IRS, how did they find out? How did they pick them? How did they get them?
It's not exactly clear how this came to the attention of the IRS, but the most likely situation is that somebody in the community saw that this happened and raised a complaint and brought it to the attention of the IRS. That's how I would guess that this all started up, and so it actually took them a while. So I said this happened in 2022, and as anything with the federal government, things move very slowly, and they didn't actually get this letter until June of 2024, which is when the IRS contacted the church and said that they were opening an investigation into the church's alleged political activities, and that's at which point First Liberty got involved in this.
Yeah, and y'all were like, I don't think so. We're not doing it like this, because then churches are going to have to walk on eggshells about anybody they let speak, whether it be a mission or a kid who's trying to raise money to go to a seminary. I mean, the ramifications could be far and wide.
Exactly, and arguably, with the expanding reach of government, almost any activity you can imagine could be construed as being political by one party or the other, by one government agency or another. And something else that's important to recognize here is with churches, this is all an exercise of futility anyways. Something that I think a lot of churches don't know that they should is that regardless of whether they actually obtain a tax-exempt status from the IRS's own regulations say that churches are automatically tax exempt. They don't have to ask permission. They don't have to go to the IRS and file anything. just by virtue of being a church, they are tax exempt. And so all of these sorts of investigations that we hear about that First Liberty has dealt with, they're all an exercise of futility anyways, because churches, the baseline start is they're tax exempt, and the IRS cannot take that away from them.
Yeah, and they shouldn't be able to. So, when we go to Mass, we don't stop and say, excuse me, is this the Republican pew? We don't do that. We don't care who we're sitting next to. We're there for the Word of God. And if there's a speaker, we sit and we listen to him, and we either clap or we don't, or we agree or we disagree. It doesn't really matter. It's called freedom of speech. So I don't see what was wrong with this, but I'm glad you all stepped in. So your intervention put this whole thing to a close.
We did, yeah. After some back and forth through letters and a meeting with the IRS, they eventually have now closed the inquiry. And now, I think that essentially confirms from the IRS's perspective that this kind of activity, inviting guest speakers to speak during sermons, even one guest speakers who are political candidates, that is acceptable even under the IRS's own understanding of the code. Now, part of this may have to do with the turnover in administration. I think that what we've seen a concerning thing about for many aspects of the government is the weaponization of the government and unfairly applying these sorts of things. So I think that there may have been a bit of that going on in the previous administration. But this one now is putting an end to the weaponization of the federal government, and they put an end to this. And hopefully we can put an end to the Johnson Amendment, period, because it's been on the books for far too long, and it is an unconstitutional law, especially as applied to churches.
Well, it's pretty historic that churches have people come and speak, so I don't know where the Johnson Amendment came from, but it needs to go away, as you said. That would take an act of Congress, though, right?
It would, yes. Yes, that would take an act of Congress to do it, unless a court were to strike it down.
Yeah. First Liberty Institute, nonprofit, public interest law firm, largest legal organization in the nation. They dedicate themselves exclusively to defending religious freedom for all Americans. Where do they learn more about this Palm Coast Church that you helped out?
You can learn more about New Way Church and all the other important cases First Liberty is handling at firstliberty.org.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.